Looking at some of the risks for beef export markets. Of course, the adverse economic conditions in developed countries still recovering from the global financial crisis, the tsunami in Japan and ongoing sovereign debt crisis in Europe. The continuing strength of the Australian dollar makes it very difficult to compete with the United States in the Japanese and Korean markets, and is also eroding exporter returns from the US market. In Japan, the relaxing of the BSE-related import protocol for US beef from 20 months of age to 30 months of age will mean that much more US beef, if not all, will now be eligible for the Japanese market. In Korea, the implementation of the Korea-US FTA free trade agreement means that the US will benefit from tariff reductions, while we've yet to finish our negotiations with Korea. And I understand their FTA comes into effect 15th of March. And again, Indonesia's self-sufficiency drive also affects beef imports. So there's we're expected to see lower beef exports to Indonesia, which had become our 5th largest market. Opportunities. There's a positive economic outlook for developing economies and other emerging markets. We would have heard that through some of the overview sessions yesterday. The US herd is also at historical lows, so we're expecting a much tighter US supply situation, and I think we're starting to see that in some of the early export figures for this year. A stronger Brazilian economy means hopefully some diversion from export to their own domestic market, but beef exports from Brazil will continue to grow. Frozen grass-fed beef demand in Japan has remained very strong, and that offers potential for northern beef, and to Korea also. And China offers potential with its rising incomes and increasing urbanisation. Its own beef herd has been contracting as government support has gone more into the expansion of pork and poultry production. So they will be looking to import as their demand rises. Now I'll move to my next topic, which is meat processing, establishing meat processing in the north. I mentioned before that Queensland's meat processing facilities are located on the eastern seaboard, Townsville, Rockhampton, Biloela, southeast Queensland nearer to Brisbane. In Western Australia, export meat processing facilities are only located south of Perth, a long distance from the Kimberley and Pilbara producers, and there are no export certified meatworks in the Northern Territory. But operational challenges face a potential new entrant to meat processing in the north, particularly given the strong seasonal factors in Northern Australia. Firstly, stable supplies of cattle are very important. A new abattoir wouldn't be sustainable if producers only used it opportunistically. Alliances or other commercial arrangements may be necessary to aid security of supply. But seasonality would still be an issue with getting cattle to those meat processors at certain times of the year during the heavy wet season. Secondly, a reliable source of skilled labour is needed. It may be difficult to attract labour to remote locations, increasing costs for a meat processor. Improvements to current transport infrastructure are crucial to increase wet season access to livestock and also for transporting beef to markets to extend the season available to a meat processor in the north. And reliable energy and water resources are necessary, and also carbon management with energy consumption optimised and greenhouse gas emissions are minimised. Development of a feed-on sector and or a shift from operating breeding enterprises to fattening enterprises will also be necessary to supply meat processors with slaughter-ready cattle in some regions. Development of irrigation in Northern Australia could provide this ability to fatten cattle through the dry season. Mosaic irrigation could underpin a major change to beef production in the north to benefit the establishment of meat processing. Irrigation for fodder will allow producers to overcome seasonal feed shortages and intensify production, with some changing from breeding to fattening enterprises. And improving the ability to keep cattle on a rising plane of nutrition throughout the year will also lead to improved meat eating quality, and this may also lead to crossbreeding and development of composite herds for this purpose, moving away from, by some producers, from a strictly Brahman herd. Without the development of a feed-on sector or a move to fattening enterprises, meat processors will only have access to lower value cattle. Reliability of supply is a risk in the north, given the extent some farms are geared toward turning off younger stock. Also, high seasonality and seasonal variation means reliable and steady numbers for processing can't be assured. Attracting skilled labour will be difficult without offering higher salaries. Meat processing sector salaries are also higher than in other competing countries. Without significant improvement to transport infrastructure, getting cattle to processors during the wet season will remain a challenge. But on the opportunity side, reduced live exports should increase supply for a processor and ease price competition. There'd be an opportunity to set up some vertical integration through alliances or partnership arrangements, ensuring some security of supply. A new processor would offer employment and training opportunities for locals, including the Indigenous workforce. And there'd also be an opportunity to build state-of-the-art facilities that are efficient and greener. I'll just quickly run through diversification, the last topic I'm talking about, irrigation in Northern Australia. Whether through mosaic irrigation or irrigation hubs or the development of precincts may provide diversification opportunities to the core beef business, such as grain crops, horticulture and other high-value crops. Current land tenure arrangements, however, may limit the flexibility that pastoralists have to diversify activities. Pastoral leasing arrangements have been generally designed over time to support and facilitate land use for pastoral activities, possibly stifling the emergence of non-pastoral land use. In the Northern Territory, Western Australia and Queensland have been reviewing their pastoral lease arrangements to address some of these limitations. So we should see some changes over the next little while. And Western Australia is looking at developing a rangelands lease in addition to a pastoral lease, which may help. So while pastoralists might look to irrigation either for fodder, intensive grazing or higher value crops, they should only do so if the benefits to their businesses outweigh the costs, of course. It's essential also to gain adequate understanding of the hydrology and other ecological functions of the area where irrigation is proposed. Development of irrigated agriculture or horticulture without adequate transport infrastructure also risks having product which can't cost-effectively access markets. So we see those as risks. On the opportunities side, there's a lot of work going on. CSIRO is looking at the feasibility of establishing irrigated mosaic agriculture in Northern Australia, and that I mentioned that project is also part of the Northern Beef Industry Strategy. As well, the $10 million North Queensland Irrigated Agricultural Strategy was announced in December 2011, and that's looking at potential water storage options for the Flinders and Gilbert River catchments in Queensland. And there already exist some small irrigation precincts in the Kimberley near Broome, among others. And these will all provide learnings on the impacts of irrigation and practical guidance on techniques and systems that can be applied. The pastoral lease reform process underway also has potential to increase flexibility for leaseholders, and there's potential for crop byproducts benefiting a feedlot sector should one emerge. So in conclusion, live exports will remain a legitimate market, an important market for some producers. For some producers it's the best use of their land, but reduced access to the Indonesian market for live cattle may lead to some adjustment for those highly reliant on the live export trade. There are opportunities for live cattle exports to other markets, still capitalising on the proximity of these markets and supply of tropically adapted feeder cattle. But if a number of things line up, there's also scope for the establishment of further meat processing in Northern Australia. There's scope for growing beef exports to emerging markets. There's scope for irrigation and a feed-on sector to underpin meat processing and to enable a shift to fattening enterprises, and this will increase supplies of slaughter weight cattle. And current irrigation research may assist with this and in providing diversification opportunities from the main beef business to increase the value of agricultural production and the economic, social and cultural welfare of Northern Australia. Thank you.